Thank you very much for joining this week's talk on the Sedra that we're reading in the diaspora of Korach. And although this week is very infamous for the terrible rift uh, that occurred when Korach, together with his cohorts, led a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, I actually would like to think about things in a slightly different way and use this Sedra to highlight the importance of diversity, plurality of opinions, and of course this is something that is becoming very popular today, this concept of diversity. And as with everything of value, everything that is eternal, we find it in the Torah in the correct way. And although we have the entrenched position of Korach, and Korach is often portrayed as a symbol of machlokes, of argument, in this presentation, because of the way that Korach goes about saying what he says, his attitude, his body language, and the way he enlists the help of the people surrounding him, I think that is the paradigm of how not to do it. But the concept of bringing a valid opinion, a valid question, a constructive criticism, this is something that is very much encouraged by the Torah. And if anything, just pointing out the flaws of certain prevailing attitudes today. We've got this talk of diversity on the one hand, yet on the other hand, if you dare to utter an opinion that is not a part of the accepted view of certain sections of the community, then whether they call it cancel culture, these things cannot be expressed, they're not acceptable. So for all the talk of diversity, actually you cannot hold a different opinion to the one that is accepted, and if you try to express it, then you are in trouble. And so even though we've got in Korach an obvious example of the dangers of machlokas, I think it's more about the dangers of people who, all of us potentially, who can get carried away with our egos and say and do things that are not appropriate. But when it is appropriate, then that is a wonderful way of thinking and living. Is something that's certainly very much encouraged by the Torah. And we can even look as proof of this concept to the fact that we have the Torah Shebechsav, we have the written Torah, and we have the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah that consists in the shape of the Mishnah and the Talmud, of plurality of opinions, of really so many different views. And if we just follow this thread through, we can see in the Sedra of Korach how we are actually being encouraged to go about doing this in the right way. And I would like to start with this concept, pointing out the difference between something that is a machlokes and also la'asot chiluk. So lechalek is to divide, is to create, to take out of one whole two parts. And we would say that this is exactly what Korach has done. But la'asot chiluk, that is something that comes about when we look at something and we try to get different perspectives and express those perspectives in a respectful way, in an appropriate way. But in doing that, we are actually spreading the light of the Torah. We are, as it were, holding up the diamond, the gem, the priceless gem that is the Torah, and enabling the 70 facets, the way that the light can be caught and reflected. And that is something that we are actually doing when we are examining it and turning it over in different ways. And the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that we read in chapter 5, Mishnah 20, and I'm just going to read that out. So this interestingly talks about korach, but I want to focus on a sort of an interesting concept that is introduced in this Mishnah. So kol machlokes shehi l'shem shamayim, every dispute that is for the sake of heaven, a sofa lehiskayim. Its end will be that I've got the translation I have here is it will have a constructive outcome. But this concept of kiyum is existence, and it is a reflexive form. So I would understand it. My interpretation is that it is almost justifying its existence. It's existing of itself, and only something that is truly worthwhile will exist of itself. V'she'eno l'shem shamayim, ein sofa lehiskayim. And a machlokes that is not for the sake of heaven, its end will not be that it will exist. It will have a constructive outcome. But I'm really quibbling with that translation. It is a very hard word to translate. And the Mishnah continues, what is an example of a machlokas that is for the sake of heaven? Zu machlokas Hillel v'Shammai. This is the machlokas of Hillel and Shammai. She'ena l'shem shamayim, and an example of one that is not for the sake of heaven. Zu machlokas korach v'chol adoso. This is the machlokas, the dispute between Korach and all of his community. And I want to focus on this concept of sofa lehiskayim, because it's not just a question of all argument is bad and anything that's not an argument is good. You know, we're all friends, we all get on together, we all think exactly the same thoughts, and that is the ideal. That's actually not the case at all. It's not what the Mishnah is telling us. It's actually, I don't think, really the lesson of the Sedra of Korach either. I believe what this Mishnah is suggesting is that what we have to examine is the attitude of the people who are involved in this machlokas. Not only the attitude, how they are going about what they're doing, how they are saying it. All of these are going to be crucial indicators in deciding whether something is a machlokas for the sake of heaven. Because if a reporter would have gone to ask Korach, are you arguing? Are you bringing this challenge because you are acting for the sake of heaven? Korach, and I believe he would honestly think that he's speaking the truth. He would say, absolutely, I am doing this for the sake of heaven. And we have found so often across all times and cultures and people that everybody thinks that they are, with their self-righteous motivation, that they are doing something for the sake of heaven. How can there be some kind of objective test? So I think that this concept is that if it is for the sake of heaven, then it is going to endure. Sofa lehiskayim. It will perpetuate itself. Whereas if we think, ideally, we want to resolve disputes so that they cease to exist, that is that might be our instinct to think that argument is bad. We need resolution. There's even a system called alternative dispute resolution, where you can actually go to registered mediators and try to resolve disputes out of court, and like that we mend a fractured world. That's the way of thinking. But what is emerging from here, especially since the paradigm, the positive example of Hillel and Shammai, this is a machlokas that endures, that we are studying in the Talmud forever, and this is something that we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose that sparring. We don't want to lose the fact that Shammai had his view, Hillel had his view, and they were completely polar opposites. in terms of their halachic conclusions. That is perpetuating itself. But even though we read about korach every year, it is in the Torah, in the book of Bamidbar, but this is something that is classified as a machlokas that has not perpetuated itself. And I think that the way we can explain this is that when people come to destroy in their machlokas, in their challenge, then it is something that dies with them. Even the spectacularly dramatic death of Korach and his cohort, but I think that still the fact that they are used as the paradigm of how not to conduct a machlokes, that consigns them to the very deep grave that opened up for them with the mouth of the earth. And I think that this perhaps is how the Mishnah is enabling us to see that actually to come up with another opinion is something that is so valuable and that increases Torah knowledge. And there's a very poignant Gemara actually, which I'm going to read out, Baba Metzia, page 84, Amud Aleph, and this happened when Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who were brothers-in-law, and they were study partners, and they debated their conflicting opinions on almost every branch of Talmudic law. When Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan was left distraught and bereft. Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, a great scholar, tried to comfort Rabbi Yochanan by substituting for Reish Lakish as Rabbi Yochanan's learning companion. So this is a quote from the Gemara. Every opinion that Rabbi Yochanan would offer, Rabbi Elazar would confirm with the Tanaitic source. Rabbi Yochanan lashed out, "Are you like the son of Lakish? Not at all. Previously, whenever I would give an opinion, the son of Lakish would ask 24 questions, and I would answer him with 24 responses. In such a fashion, the legal discussion became enlarged and enhanced. But you only provide me with supporting proofs. Don't I know that my opinions have merit?" Rabbi Yochanan walked aimlessly, tore his garments, and wept without cease. He cried out, "Where are you, son of Lakish? Where are you, son of Lakish?" until he lost his mind. The other sages requested divine mercy, and Rabbi Yochanan died. And I think here we have this very poignant need at the highest level of Talmudic dispute for the honest sparring, for that dissent for the sake of heaven, where you are really trying to bring Hashem's word into the world, trying to find all the different nuances, all the possibilities. And very interestingly, the dissenting opinions of the Sanhedrin, and we have this in the Mishnah, that I will just tell you, Mishnah Eduyot, and also in the Rambam and Ra'avad. In the world of halacha, minority dissenting views are never nullified. These opinions are also part of the religious legal landscape and can become the law of the majority at another period in time or for a different and difficult individual situation within the same period. So even though when there was a judgment in the Sanhedrin and the majority decision was the way that the dispute was settled, the minority dissenting opinion was always kept, and that was specially ready for a time. And this is something that we observe on many occasions, that when we are learning Torah this year, there are going to be special nuances that come through that will enable us to see words, meanings that we hadn't actually thought of before. But the current situation that we find ourselves in, they open up our minds, they open up our possibilities. And so that's why these minority views are going to have the possibility of becoming law. And this is something how that we can use in our everyday lives as we encounter different situations and apply them through the lens of the Torah, that this a minority view that when it was actually given was not the way that the matter was settled, but many years later, this actually was referred to and became the basis for a judgment. And so, I think perhaps linking up to the Mishnah that we mentioned earlier, this is an example of sofa lihiskayim, that something that is tapping into the eternal truth of the Torah, even though it's stating a dissenting view, that is something that is constantly alive. And so we have, as the Mishnah points out, Hillel and Shammai. That is the classic example that is given. And on the one hand, we can see that argument for the sake of argument is potentially very destructive, certainly through the experience of this week's Sedra of korach. And it was something that actually occurred to me, of all places, in Wimbledon. I had the very special treat of being able to go to Wimbledon. And I saw a match, the opening match on centre court between the defending champion Novak Djokovic and a 24-year-old South Korean tennis player, Woo Sun Kwon. And the match was really very, very exciting, amazing tennis, especially from Mr. Kwon. And as I was watching the match, there is a possibility to call out a challenge, and there are a certain amount of challenges that one can have. And if those challenges are upheld, they don't count as a lost challenge, as it were. If they're not upheld, then you have, I think, a maximum of 3. And as the match was progressing, I could see that Mr. Kwon, and I wondered whether it was some kind of cultural reason, that he was not challenging with anything like the frequency of his opponent. And I just wondered whether he was coming from a culture where they were used to accepting the rule, the authority, and it was not something that came easy to contradict that, to argue against that. And other societies, other cultures, that would be much more at their fingertips, something that they would do more readily. And when Mr. Kwan actually did challenge, it was actually very welcome, because you felt that he knew, because it was so sparingly exercised, because it was exercised in the right way, then he was actually, he was showing the value of the challenge, as opposed to somebody who just didn't want to accept the decision of the linesman, the decision of the umpire, and was pushing back against that. And I think that he actually showed me at that point that something like a challenge can be so appropriate and so necessary. But if it is abused, if it is coming from a place of ego, of not wanting to accept a higher authority, then it becomes quite destructive, and it becomes an insult to the person who keeps on using this ability to, when you think something is unfair, to actually speak up against it. And I think that whether it's the Torah, the 5 books of the Chomishei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah of Moshe that we refer to, throughout all of these, there's always going to be the discussions, the debates between Avraham Avinu and Hashem, when Avraham challenges Hashem to try to save the people of Sodom, for example. Or we have in the book of Bamidbar, where we are currently reading the Torah, and we have the people who want to come in the Sedra B'Haloscha and offer. They've missed their chance to offer the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, and they don't want to be denied this opportunity for mitzvah. So they come with this challenge, with this question, or the daughters of Zelophehad that we will be reading about shortly. And they too, they say, we want to have a portion in the land of Israel. So all throughout the Torah, we've got this possibility. It's not that we sit quietly with our arms folded and we're never allowed to speak out, not at all. But it is important to really analyze the negative aspect of what happens in this week's Sedra of Korach, to realize that this is something that we are that we don't want to be typecast as Korach, but all of us possess an ego, and when that ego is running out of control, then these terrible things, to the extent of what we read about in this week's Sedra, that the words that are used against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, the consequences of those words, and the earth that opens its mouth, the fire that consumes the people, the plague that consumes the people, and really, in its wake, destructive machlokas does all this. And very interesting, we read in this week's Sedra that the fire pans that the 250 dissenters who joined in the rebellion of Korach, they are actually used on the Mizbeach. And it's ironical, actually, that the Mishnah is talking about something that when it's a machlokes that's not for the sake of heaven, that this is something that does not continue to exist. But ironically, the fire pans are actually preserved and kept on the Mizbeach. And I think it's linking us, it's taking up this concept of it's so important to learn from the negative and from the positive as well. And by immortalizing the fire pans, by immortalizing the actual vessels that were used with a challenge, the leadership challenge against Moshe Rabbeinu, against Aaron, ostensibly to that they didn't want Moshe's brother Aaron to get the job of the Kohen Gadol, and so really the fire pans that have now become a symbol, an emblem of how we have to accept that only the sons of Aaron have to bring the incense and on the fire pans. And so it is like a memorial. This was wrong, and by remembering it, we are going to prevent ourselves from making the same mistake again. And I think that this is really, as we look at the structure of the Torah, we look at the contents of the Torah Shebal Peh and the sparring. And very interestingly, actually, Rav Kook calls the Chachomim a Bale Trisin, which means shield bearers. And the concept is that they don't carry swords, they don't carry spears, they carry shields, because with their arguments, they are not attacking arguments, they are defending arguments, they are defending a position, they are defending the honor and the truth of the Torah. And even though we can have many disparate views, when you come to defend the Torah, when your questions, your challenges are to try to elucidate, to enlighten, to bring out that light of Torah, then this is something that is going to sofa lehiskayim. This is something that will continue. And just to quote from Rav Kook, Rav Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook, he says, "Scholars increase peace in the world. A multiplicity of peace means that all sides and all views must be considered. Then it will be clarified how each one of them has its place, each one in accordance with its value, its place, and its specific issue. Only through a collection of all parts and all details, all of those ideals which appear to be different, and all disparate professional opinions, Only by means of these will the light of truth and righteousness be revealed, and the wisdom of the Lord and his love and the light of true Torah. So I think Korach is teaching us. Korach is teaching us what not to say, how not to behave, but making sure that we understand that when it is appropriate, the dissenting view is something that brings more light into the Torah and shows how there is a place for everyone who comes honestly seeking the truth and honestly wanting to spread the light of the Torah. And may we all of us learn these lessons and be in this category, as each one of us can bring our ideas, our concepts, and bring more light into the world as a result. Thank you very much for listening, and wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.